So welcome to our Australian Employer Visa Essentials. My name is Erica. I'm from Bravo Migration, and it's a pleasure to have you here live. We are a migration firm that has been helping people with all types of visas since 2008. So I'm a migrant myself. I migrated to Australia in 1996, as you can tell by my accent, and I haven't lost my accent, and I don't think I ever will. I started working with international students and student visas as soon as I arrived. And in 2005, I registered as a migration agent. So this year is my 17th year of registration. I am one of the leading migration agents in the country. I present to other migration agents, and I'm also an assessor in the admission exam to the profession. So in and outside of Bravo Migration, I probably have worked in 15, 20,000 visa applications. Now, what you are here for, it's not to hear about me, is to actually find out what is the employer-sponsored visa program at the moment, what are the rules, what's happening, and this is what I'm here for, to discuss this with you. I like to start from the basics. So people are here in Australia, they all hold visas if you are not an Australian citizen. And in a lot of cases, people don't understand exactly what is a visa and what type of visas are out there. A visa is actually your travel document. It's a document that allows you to come to Australia and remain here. And there's three types of visas. There's a temporary visa, a permanent visa, or a bridging visa. A temporary visa is a visa that has a day to end. It's not a visa forever that allows you to stay here forever, but it will be a visa that says you can stay only until this day. Examples of temporary visas: visitor visas, student visas, working holiday visas, graduate visas, even the sponsorship GSS visa is a temporary visa. So they have conditions attached to them. You can work or you cannot work. You should only work for this employer. You should be studying, and so on. It's legal for the Australian government to attach conditions to a temporary visa. A permanent visa, on the other hand, is completely the opposite. It's a visa that allows you to stay in Australia forever. In fact, when you get a permanent visa, it says allowed to remain in Australia indefinitely. That's the wording. And it's a beautiful thing to read this when you are granted permanent residence. And the government cannot attach any conditions to a permanent visa. So they can't legally tell you where to live, where to study, if you should work on doing what and where. Now, we have a third type of visa, which is the bridging visa. And a lot of people also think, I want to apply for a bridging visa. A bridging visa is not a visa you necessarily apply for by itself. It's a visa that is granted to you as a consequence of an application you have made for another visa while in Australia in most cases. So that bridging visa keeps you lawful, legal in Australia while you're waiting for a visa decision to be made. So these are the three main types of visas. Today, we are here to talk about the employer-sponsored visas. We have four types of employer-sponsored visas, major. There's the 408 as well, which is a visa for entertainers, special programs, and that has recently been used as the COVID visa. That is also an employer-sponsored visa. There's the Pacific Labor Scheme. It's also an employer visa, but it's not the focus of our presentation today. We have the subclass 482 temporary skill shortage visa that replaced the 457 visa. It's the famous sponsorship visa. We have subclass 407, which is a training visa for people who have a job offer, but it's a job where they're still going to be learning on the job, and there's a personalized structure training program for them in that company in Australia because they might not have a lot of work experience. And we have subclass 494, which is the skilled regional sponsored visa. So very similar to subclass 482, but only for people who have a job offer from a regional area. There's a visa for people who also have a job offer in Australia for a short period of time, and it's only for people who are outside of Australia. That's called subclass 400, temporary activity work. And we have one type of permanent employer visa, that's subclass 186, permanent employer nomination visa. So today we're going to be focusing on the three most common and most popular visa subclasses. Subclass 482, temporary skilled shortage TSS sponsorship visa. Subclass 494, the skilled regional sponsored visa. And the permanent visa, subclass 186, permanent employer nomination visa. Starting with the 482 TSS sponsorship visa. This is the most common work visa. So we get a lot of people contacting us, especially people who are not in Australia, saying, I need a work visa, or I want a work visa for Australia. The thing with Australia is we don't have what many people consider a work visa. We technically don't have a visa for someone to come here and work wherever they want. This can be done on a permanent visa, but when we look at the temporary work visas, there's no such thing. We have the work and holiday, or the working holiday visa subclasses, where yes, you can come here and work, but it's not technically a work visa, it's a work and holiday visa. And then we have the temporary sponsorship work visas, which require you to first find a job in your field in Australia, in an occupation that's part of the program, and then apply for permanent residence, for the sponsorship visa. Now, the working holiday visas, they don't require a job offer, but they're also only for certain nationalities that are part of the program. Not all countries can participate. They're only for people aged under 30 or 35, depending on the country. And they're not necessarily a visa that will lead into a longer stay, a permanent residence visa later. So the work visas are really the subclass 482 and subclass 494. And as I said, you can't just apply. You can't write to us and say, I need a work visa. The response we will give you is the response we give to everyone. First, you need to find a job offer. Then you contact us, because then we can work on the visa application. You can't apply for any of these visas if you don't have a job offer yet. Now, if you're in Australia on a temporary visa, and that's the most common pathway to a TSS sponsorship visa, normally what we see clients approaching us, they're here on student visas, working holiday visas, work and holiday visas, graduate visas, and they start working with an Australian company in their field, and then that company says, you're really good, we want to keep you on a permanent full-time basis. How do we do that? This is the visa for that. When the company applies together with you to get you full work rights with that company. Now, as you can see on the slide, this visa requires 3 applications. Number 1, the company must be approved to sponsor you. Number 2, they need to approve the position that they're offering to you. As I said, not all positions can be sponsored. We receive emails from a lot of people saying, I'm a forklift driver, I am a nanny, I am a bus driver. Those occupations are not part of this visa unless there's an agreement from an area with the Commonwealth. So there's a big chunk of the application that requires explaining what the position on offer is and why the company needs someone in that position now. And the third part is your visa approval. So you can't have your visa approved if the Department of Home Affairs hasn't approved the nomination. And to have a nomination approved, that company needs to be approved to be a sponsor. So let's look a little bit closer into each one of these 3 steps. Any Australian employer with an ABN can apply to become an approved sponsor. Now, We always also get questions. What does the company need to be approved? Some people have this misconception that a company needs to be turning over $3 million to be approved or have 50 people working. The department is going to look at the company and decide if they could be approved or not. They're going to see if the company hasn't broken any taxation or financial or corporate laws in Australia. So that's what we called, there's got to be no adverse information against that company. They're going to look into that business and see if it's financially okay. So if it's a small business that is not turning at a loss, maybe they're not making millions of dollars, but if they're being able to pay for their bills and show they still have money left to maybe hire someone else and sponsor them, that could be an approval. Now, once the business is approved, that approval stays valid for 5 years. And as you can see, the application fee is not expensive. So many companies in Australia have a valid business sponsorship approval. We work directly with companies in a lot of cases. Sometimes we are talking to the individual, the employee who is seeking a visa. In other cases, we come approved and sponsor people several times. So that's all part of the service we offer. Now, the nomination is probably the hardest part to be approved. This is where the department is really going to look into the company and try to understand why that company needs someone in that position, why now. They will also want to see something called labor market testing, and that is a requirement that the business must test the market for an Australian worker. So the company needs to publish some ads online and show to the department that they have tried to find an Australian. It's not as complicated as it sounds, especially now. We've never had such a shortage of workers in all industries in Australia since probably decades. We're really struggling to hire people from hospitality workers, cleaners, aged care workers, all the way up to, neuroscientists and doctors and the like. So it's not very hard to show to the government that there's not a lot of people applying for a job in a company when that company posts that job. So this is more a bureaucracy, but it must be undergone. Now, you can't, as I said, you can't find any job and say, I want to apply for sponsorship. You need to find a job offer in a position that is in the right list for this visa. The right lists for this visa are the medium and long-term skills shortage list, the MLT-SSL, or the SGSOL, the short-term skilled occupation list. So again, if you I got a job offer as a window cleaner, that's great, but window cleaners, unfortunately, are not part of the list of the program. So someone cannot be sponsored in that occupation, for example. Now, the job offer must be full-time and must attract a salary package of at least $54,000 a year plus superannuation. Some occupations have what we call a caveat, a restriction, where the salary has to be even higher. And we have occupations that require salaries of $65,000 a year, $80,000, $90,000, $180,000, if we're talking about, excuse me, a general manager, a CEO of a company. So minimum there. Now, we also need to look at how much someone in the market would be earning in that role, because sometimes, I'm a doctor, I'm being offered $54,000 a year. That's above the minimum, but the Department of Immigration is going to go like, but that's not really what a doctor earns. Why is this salary? We have to look at those restrictions. And here sometimes a business, a sponsor, may be restricted if they don't have at least 5 employees, if they're not turning over a certain amount of money, but that's only for a few occupations, not for all occupations. The nomination fee, again, it's inexpensive, it's $3,300, but every employer sponsoring a foreign worker needs to make a contribution to what is called the Skilling Australians Fund, and that will vary according to the size of the years they're nominating you for this visa. So it could be from $100 to $7,200. That's the most expensive part. Now, when I say it depends on the number of years they will nominate you for, it's because there's 3 streams in this visa. We have the short-term stream, and that's for occupations that are on the short-term list, the SGSOL. And in most cases, this is for people who can be nominated for 1 or 2 years of visa. After 2 years of visa, you can apply again for another 1 or 2 years, and there's no pathway to a permanent employer visa, with exceptions. We're going to look at that later. Now, the medium-term stream, the visa can be approved for up to 40 years. And after 3 years working for the same employer, that worker could apply for a permanent visa. We're going to look at that later. But what's important here to know is that the Skilling Australians Fund will be calculated according to the number of years your employer nominates you. Labor agreement is a separate animal. It's when a company has an agreement with the government, and then there's different criteria, and we can't get into every one of the agreements today. But that's not a very common pathway anyway. Now, a couple of examples of occupations that are in the medium and long-term list. The MS, who could get a 4-year 482 TSS sponsorship visa. Now, most importantly, if you have an occupation in this list, then you are able to apply for the permanent employer visa later, if your employer wants to nominate you for PR. So we have examples as chefs, doctors, IT professionals, but that's not the whole list. There's more. This is just some examples. And we have the SGSOL, the short-term list. And this is when you can get 2 years of 482 visa, followed by another 2 years. And unfortunately, in most cases, you cannot apply for a permanent employer visa. Some examples here are cooks, restaurant managers, marketing managers, and so on. Now, if you want to get one of these visas approved, talking about what the company needs to show as evidence, but what do you need as a person for this visa? As I said, you need to find a job in your field. If you are a doctor in your home country and you come to Australia on a student visa and you start working in a restaurant and you find that you love cooking, start cooking in that restaurant, and you are very good, and that owner of that restaurant says, I want to sponsor you to work for me. You are not a cook, you are not a chef, you're a doctor. You need to have the minimum qualification required to perform that occupation. And on top of that, you need at least 2 years of full-time work experience in the same position. Some occupations, if you don't have the qualification, but you have 3 or 5 years of work experience, you can replace that qualification with work experience. Others, for example, if you're a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, you really need the qualification. Now, normally that needs to be 2 years full-time, but if you have worked part-time in Australia in that position, in that occupation, we can claim that time, but it will be counted in half, or what we call a pro rata basis. You need to have a certain level of English, and that's what you can see down the bottom of the slide. If you're applying for the short-term stream, if your occupation is on the SGSOL list, your IELTS score needs to be overall 5 with nothing under 4.5. If, on the other hand, you have an occupation in high demand and your occupation is on the medium-term stream, we're going to need to see IELTS score of 5 in each of these components. Now, you may include family members, your spouse, your dependents, children in this visa, and some occupations will require you to have a registration. So again, if you're a physiotherapist, you're not able to work in Australia if you don't have a physiotherapy registration before you start working. So to apply for this visa, you need to at least have started your registration process. And to perform your job, you're gonna need that registration. You also need to be in good health and not have a criminal record to get this visa. Once it's approved, as I said, it could be for 1 year up to 4 years. Now, the biggest problem we have with the 482 visa is that in 2017, the government announced the end of the 457 visa. And in 2018, replaced the 457 visa with the TSS sponsorship 482 visa that we have today. That was not such a big deal because the visa is not that different from the 457. But the problem was when we had the 457 visa in effect, everyone who got a 457 visa after working with the same employer for 2 years could apply for PR, for a permanent visa, the 186 interpermanent visa. When the government replaced the 457 with the 482 visa, now, as I said, only people who have an occupation on the medium and long-term list can apply for PR via the employer program. So that's bad news. We hope that the new government change this. The Labour government was always against ending this pathway to permanent residence. They believe way more in welcoming workers to Australia to stay here permanently. They're not very happy with having you come on a 482 visa, work here for 2-4 years, and then not having a pathway for PR. So we've got all our fingers crossed that this will go back to how it was, or some sort of similar situation. On the other hand, the previous government who ended the 457 visa, on the other hand, they also created the regional visa 494, which is another type of sponsorship visa, and it is for people who have a job offer in a regional area. And the 494 visa, regardless of your occupation, will lead into a permanent visa 3 years later. So if you have had a consultation with us, especially if you're overseas, we probably suggested that you come to Australia and settle on your student visa, on your working holiday visa in a regional area, because we have hopes that you will find a job offer in those areas, and it will be easier for you if you don't have an occupation in demand. It may be the only way for you to apply for a permanent visa later. Now, how does this permanent visa work? As I said before, it is only for people who have an occupation in the medium and long-term skills shortage list, and who either have held a 482 visa and worked for that Australian employer for at least 3 years, and then the employer nominates them for the permanent visa 186, which is called employer nomination permanent visa. So you can't get sponsored for 4 years and then apply for PR by yourself. The company needs to be involved twice, when you apply for the 482 visa and when you apply for the 186 visa. Or if you have a lot of work experience and the right qualifications, the company could nominate you even sooner than 3 years via what we call the direct entry stream. Now, some people, very lucky people who are in Australia right now, even if they have an occupation in the short-term list, could maybe apply for this visa, even if their occupation is not in the MLT SSL. So the government started what is called transitional arrangements on the 1st of July. And this says that people who were here between the 1st of February 2020 and the 14th of December 2021, which is when our borders were closed during COVID, if these people were here with any visas, student visa, working holiday visa, graduate visa, and now they're on a sponsorship visa in the short-term stream because their occupation is not in demand. So they're marketing managers, they're restaurant managers, they're graphic designers, they're primary teachers, they're many others I cannot think of now, but there's around 500 occupations in that list. Those people, if they already on a 482 visa, they may be able to apply for permanent residence under these new arrangements. However, you have to remember, the requirement for the permanent visa is to have been working for the same employer while holding a 482 visa for at least 3 years. The problem with this transitional arrangement now, excuse me, if we read the legislation, there's nothing saying that there's an end date to this period of grace, to these arrangements. But the department sent a newsletter recently saying that these arrangements will end in 2 years, in July 2024. So if you're someone who will get your 482 visa soon, or who has just been granted your 482, you may not have enough time to work for the 3 years. So what the government is saying is that this is not for new 482 visa holders, but for people who were here before. Again, if this is your case, we have information that the current government, as I said, is not happy with the situation. Labour Party, which is the party in government at the moment, has a historical preference for permanent residents. They really like people to, if you're working here, if we invited you to work in our country, you should have a permanent visa to apply for if you want to stay here permanently. So we are hoping that there will be more changes coming in this scenario. Again, if you're confused, if you don't know if this applies to you, please contact us, book a visa action plan, because this is very important. It may make a difference for you. You may think you don't qualify, and we say, no, you qualify and you can apply for PR. I just started helping a Canadian client this week where he didn't know if this applied to you. And we had a consultation and I told him, yes, it applies to you. And now we're working on his 186 application. On the other hand, you may believe that this applies to you and you're comfortable and waiting. And then in 3 years' time, you find out that's not the case. You really need to know as soon as possible to plan ahead, to have another plan. Super important. Okay, now the other option many people have is the regional sponsorship 494. And here, most occupations are in the list for this visa. And regardless if your occupation is in high demand or not, after 3 years holding this visa and working and living in a regional area in Australia, you may be eligible for a permanent visa. And this permanent visa is subclass 191, and it does not require your employer to be involved. So in my opinion, this is a much better visa. Now, what is a regional area? It's the whole country except Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne. So if you get a job offer on the Gold Coast, Newcastle, Wollongong, Perth, Adelaide, Sunshine Coast, Darwin, the whole country pretty much is a regional area. So if you don't have an occupation in demand, this is the visa you should be looking at getting. And sometimes we point this out to people when they keep insisting that they want to live in Sydney or Melbourne. And we say, yes, you can. You're going to get a 482 visa, but what are you going to do later? You need to have a pathway for PR. So we really like this visa because it gives more people better chances to apply for PR. And it's a great visa. It's valid for 5 years. You have access to Medicare, which you don't have on the 482. You get full work rights. You can only work for the sponsor, obviously, but you can change sponsors and apply again for a new nomination. And I think it's a great deal. Now, it's harder for the individual. For the company, it's the same. They need to be approved as a sponsor. They need to approve the nomination. But for you, there's more requirements. So remember, the 482 visa, they're due to have 2 years full-time work experience in the same position. This one, we're talking about 3 years. You also need to apply for what is called a skills assessment, which is an official registration or validation of your occupation here in Australia with the correct work authority. You also need to be under 45. You need to be under 45. But keeping in mind that the permanent visa 186, you need to be under 45 anyway. There are some exemptions, but the exemptions are very hard to get. It's only in very specific cases. So with the 494, only for people who are under 45. And your level of English has to be higher than the level of English required for the subclass 482. In a lot of cases, we have clients that are in regional areas. The company is in a regional area, the position, the person, they come to us and say, we want to apply for this one because then our employee can PR in 3 years. But then when we speak to that person or the person sits for an English test, they can't reach 5. They end up reaching, they can't reach 6, which is the minimum score here. It comes to a point where we say, look, your English score is actually enough for the 482 visa. We should apply for that. And in the meantime, you're working and improving your English. And then we come back later to the 494 visa. So we have used the 494 visa strategically in a number of cases. Sometimes people have 2 years of work experience, but not 3. So then we apply for the 482, and 1 year later, we apply for the 494. Because the 482 sponsorship TSS visa is not restricted to any areas. Any employer in the whole of Australia can sponsor workers in that visa 482. This is the one that, so nothing prevents me from getting a 482 visa for someone who's living in Canberra. I can get that visa, but I can't get a 494 visa for someone in Brisbane, for example. So we will look at that for you and see which one, which one of the temporary visas is better to set you up for a future application for permanent visa, be it the 186 or the regional permanent visa 191. Now, this visa will be available for people who hold the 494 visa and also the 491 skilled visa, which is not part of this program. But it's and work after getting the 494 visa. If you spend 3 years working in Australia, living and working in a regional area, and earning at least $54,000, $55,000 a year, then you can apply for this permanent visa. This visa has no age requirements. So remember, you need to be under 45 when you apply for the 494 visa. But when you apply for the 191, there's no age requirements. There'll be no occupation lists. So if your occupation has been completely removed from the program, you are safe. And we don't need to involve the employer. So it works out cheaper for the employer to get you on a 494 than a 482. And you don't need to count on that employer. So if they don't want to be involved, you still can apply for PR. Okay. One big problem we have at the moment with all employer-sponsored visas is the fact that they are taking ages to be processed. And why? During the pandemic, the Department of Home Affairs apparently fired a lot of people or moved people around. So instead of having people on the sponsorship visa, because sponsorship applications fell dramatically in the beginning of the pandemic with the lockdowns, they moved those people to the travel exemption area within the department because the borders were closed, but a lot of people could apply for exemptions to come into Australia if they had a family member, if they had an occupation in a certain list called priority migration occupation list. So we didn't have many applications being processed, and we didn't have many people within the department processing those applications. So that was the situation. When the borders reopened gradually from November last year to February this year, then what we saw was an increase in applications because the economy kind of went back to normal. A lot of people had left the country, a lot of student visa holders, backpackers who would be working are not here. So Australian employers were and are still desperate for workers. Lots of Australians moving jobs because of the current economy, going for better jobs. So there's a lot of employers that having to sponsor foreign workers. So the number in applications for all the 3 employer-sponsored visas increased a lot. So a 482 visa, and it's crazy because we just had an approval this week, 2 days after we launched a TSS 482 visa application. But that's because that occupation is in the priority list. Now, on the other hand, we have cases of occupations in the short-term skilled occupation list that I've been waiting for over a year now. And that's the situation. And that's why there's such a crazy time estimate there. It could be anywhere from a month to a year and a bit. 186 applications, the same. It could be very quick in 4 months, or it could take even 2 years. In our experience, they're taking around a year. And the 494, again, if that occupation is in super high demand or not, it will affect, but it could be 2 to 10 months. So if you look at the averages here, a 494 visa is being processed quicker. So another advantage to that visa. Again, if you're watching us live today, or if you're watching the recording of this webinar, we're here to help you. We have a lot of free content online. We have a YouTube channel with many, many videos recorded by us explaining basics or advanced things. We really ask you that you watch all that before you commit to consulting with us. We're always providing these free webinars to you guys. We really can help you with the first step. We also prepare and lodge visa applications for individuals and employers. But the first step's the most important. You need to, one, understand the visa you're wanting to apply for. And we hope this webinar has helped you with that. If after you read and watch all of this and you still believe that, you may have a chance, get in touch with us, book a visa action plan, because that's the only way to find for sure if you qualify for a visa or not, is consulting a registered migration agent. Now, if you don't qualify now, we'll create an action plan so you can qualify one day. And if you are in Australia already and you have a job offer from an Australian employer, we can offer a free assessment with one of our registered agents by phone. And that happens faster because your employer probably needs you desperately. So we are going to have to make things happen very fast for you. If you qualify in both cases, then we can help you preparing and lodging that application. In any case, we really thank you for watching us. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, I really suggest you do so. Our newsletter is full of important information. You can sign up in this link below. We would love to help you further. So please contact us if you want to book one of our visa action plans or a free assessment if you qualify within our terms and conditions. If you're here in Australia, I wish you a great rest of your day. If you're anywhere else in the world, have a good night, a good morning, wherever you are. Thank you.